Emmy Göring called herself the First Lady of the Third Reich. She lived in a palace filled with 1,375 stolen masterpieces, wore gowns sewn by concentration camp prisoners, and draped herself in jewellery taken from murdered families. But when the Allies put her on trial after the war, they didn't charge her with war crimes. They charged her with something far more disturbing. And the verdict forces us to answer a question we still can't resolve today. The actress who married into evil. Emmy Sonnemann was a moderately successful stage actress in her 40s when she met Hermann Göring. She had spent years performing in regional theatres across Germany, earning decent reviews, but never quite breaking through to true stardom. Then she caught the attention of the most powerful Air Force commander in Europe, and everything changed. Their wedding on April 10, 1935, wasn't just a marriage ceremony, it was a state event. Adolf Hitler himself served as best man and witness. Fighter planes roared overhead in formation. Thousands lined the streets of Berlin to catch a glimpse of the new bride. Emmy Sonnemann, the provincial actress who had never quite made it to the top, had just become the most prominent woman in Nazi Germany. Within months, she transformed completely. The woman who had once auditioned for parts was now hosting state dinners. The actress who had memorized other people's words was now shaping conversations with Europe's most powerful figures. And in December 1938, she officially joined the Nazi Party, receiving an unusually low membership number that was backdated to 1932, as if she had been a true believer from the very beginning. But membership numbers and party cards were just paperwork. The real evidence of Emmy's new life was waiting at home, the palace built on plunder. Hermann Göring built his wife a monument to stolen wealth. He called it Carinhall, named after his first wife who had died years earlier. The estate sprawled across the forests northeast of Berlin, a hunting lodge that had grown into something closer to a palace, complete with rare animals roaming the grounds and servants attending to every need. At the heart of Carinhall sat a 34-metre grand gallery. Its walls displayed over 1,375 artworks, paintings by Vermeer, Cranach, Renoir, and dozens of other masters. The collection would have been the envy of any major museum in the world. But none of it had been purchased. Every single piece had been stolen. During the Nazi occupation of Europe, approximately 600,000 paintings were seized from Jewish families. Some were taken from homes as their owners were marched to deportation trains. Others were confiscated from galleries and private collections. Many came from the Jeu de Paume Museum in Paris, which the Nazis had converted into a warehouse for plundered Jewish property. Hermann Göring visited that warehouse personally over 20 times, walking through rooms filled with stolen masterpieces and hand-selecting pieces for his private collection. Emmy walked past these paintings every day. She entertained guests beneath them. She posed for photographs with stolen Vermeers visible in the background. But the artwork was only the beginning. Dressed in evidence. Emmy Göring's wardrobe became legendary across Europe. She owned more haute couture than any woman on the continent. Gowns, furs, shoes, and accessories that would have taken a lifetime to accumulate through legitimate means. She appeared at state functions draped in silk and velvet, her fingers heavy with diamonds and gold. What she claimed not to know was where any of it came from. Her gowns were sewn by enslaved seamstresses working in concentration camps. Her jewellery had been stripped from the bodies of Jewish women before they were murdered. The textiles that made up her legendary wardrobe had been plundered from families who no longer existed. Each piece she wore carried a history of theft and death. Later, during her trial, Emmy would insist she had no knowledge of the origins of her possessions. She was simply a wife who wore what her husband gave her. She never asked questions. She never wondered why her closets overflowed while the rest of Europe starved. But how do you not ask questions when you own the largest private wardrobe in Europe? How do you not wonder about the provenance when your walls are covered in museum-quality art that your husband acquired during a war of conquest and extermination? Emmy's defence rested on a claim of naivete so extreme it bordered on the absurd. And yet, in the chaos of post-war justice, that defence would prove surprisingly effective. The 500 plane celebration. On June 2nd, 1938, Emmy Göring gave birth to a daughter. She was 45 years old, ancient by the standards of the era for a first-time mother. Hermann was overjoyed. He named the child Edda, and, to celebrate her arrival, he ordered 500 Luftwaffe fighter planes to fly over Berlin in formation. 500 military aircraft roaring across the capital in a display of power and pride. All because Hermann Göring had become a father. He later told associates that he would have ordered 1,000 planes if the child had been a boy. The flyover was broadcast across Germany as propaganda, a celebration of Nazi strength and fertility, while the rest of Europe watched with growing dread. Hitler himself became Edda's godfather. The christening photographs show the Führer holding the infant, while Emmy beams beside him, surrounded by the most powerful men in the Reich. Emmy had reached the absolute peak of her influence. She was the unofficial First Lady of Nazi Germany, mother to Hitler's goddaughter, mistress of a palace filled with stolen treasures. But her arrogance would make enemies even within the regime. The woman who thought she was untouchable. Emmy was so convinced of her elevated status that she made a critical mistake. She openly despised Eva Braun. Hitler's mistress was kept hidden from the German public. Her existence a carefully guarded secret. But within the inner circle, Eva held a position that demanded respect. Emmy refused to give it. She snubbed Eva at gatherings. She treated her with visible contempt. She made it clear that she considered herself the true First Lady of the Reich, while Eva was merely a mistress to be tolerated. This wasn't just social drama between rival women. It was insubordination that struck at Hitler's personal life. The Führer eventually grew angry enough to intervene. He ordered Hermann to ensure that Emmy treated Eva with proper respect, but the damage was already done. Emmy found herself banned from the Berghof, Hitler's beloved Bavarian retreat. The woman who had once hosted state dinners alongside the Führer was now persona non grata at his private sanctuary. Emmy didn't seem to realise what this meant. She had made an enemy of the most powerful man in Europe over a matter of social pride. And when the regime began to collapse, she would discover just how few allies she had left. The execution order. April 1945. The Third Reich was dying. Soviet forces were closing on Berlin from the east. American and British troops were advancing from the west. Hitler had retreated to his underground bunker, issuing orders to armies that no longer existed. In this chaos, Hermann Göring made his move. He sent a telegram to Hitler asking permission to assume leadership of the Reich if the Führer remained trapped in Berlin. It was framed as a contingency plan, a way to ensure continuity of government, but Hitler saw it as betrayal. His response was immediate and brutal. He stripped Hermann of all titles and positions. He expelled him from the Nazi Party. And then he issued an order to the SS. Execute Hermann Göring, his wife Emmy, and their 7-year-old daughter Edda. The family that had lived as Nazi royalty was now marked for death by their own regime. SS troops were dispatched to carry out the execution. Emmy, Hermann, and little Edda waited for the end to come. But the chaos of Germany's collapse saved them. Before the SS could reach the family, Allied forces captured them instead. The woman who had been condemned to death by Hitler now found herself a prisoner of the Americans. Her husband would face trial at Nuremberg. Her fate remained uncertain. The trial that couldn't decide. Emmy spent nearly 3 years in custody before her own reckoning came. She was held at Camp Ashcan in Luxembourg alongside other high-ranking Nazi prisoners, then transferred to internment facilities in Germany. Her husband was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death at Nuremberg. On October 15, 1946, hours before he was scheduled to hang, Hermann Göring swallowed a cyanide capsule and died in his cell. Emmy was now a widow, but she still had to face her own denazification trial. The proceedings in 1948 became a test case for a question that had no easy answer. How much did Emmy Göring actually know? Her defence painted a picture of a naive woman, sheltered from the truth, focused only on her role as wife and mother. She was an actress, they argued, not a politician. She had no interest in ideology or policy. She simply lived the life her husband provided without asking uncomfortable questions. Prosecutors saw it differently. They pointed to her steadfast political beliefs. Her Nazi Party membership with its suspiciously backdated number. And the undeniable fact that she had spent a decade living surrounded by evidence of systematic theft and murder. The stolen paintings on her walls. The plundered jewellery on her fingers. The gowns sewn by enslaved prisoners in concentration camps. How could anyone claim ignorance while living in that house? The verdict history can't resolve? On July 21, 1948, the tribunal delivered its verdict. Emmy Göring was convicted, but not as a war criminal. She was classified as a Nazi activist. Someone who had benefited from the system, rather than someone who had committed crimes within it. Her sentence reflected this ambiguous classification. 1 year in a labour camp, which she had already served during her internment. 30% of her remaining assets confiscated. A 5-year ban from performing on stage, ending the acting career she had abandoned more than a decade earlier. And then she walked free. Her husband had been executed for crimes against humanity. Emmy received what amounted to a slap on the wrist. The woman who had worn jewellery stripped from murdered women, who had lived in a palace decorated with stolen masterpieces, who had hosted dinners beneath paintings taken from families sent to death camps. She served no additional time beyond what she had already spent waiting for trial. The verdict satisfied no one. Victims' families saw it as a travesty. Legal scholars questioned whether the denazification system was capable of handling cases this complex. And historians would debate for decades whether Emmy Göring had gotten away with something, or whether there was simply no law that covered what she had done. From palace to poverty. The contrast between Emmy's life before and after the war was almost too stark to comprehend. The woman who had owned Europe's largest wardrobe now possessed exactly 2 dresses. The hostess of Carinhall, with its grand gallery and rare animals and endless servants, now lived in a cramped apartment with no running water, no toilet, and no electricity. She spent years fighting in German courts to recover what remained of her husband's property. Some battles she won, small victories that returned pieces of jewellery or minor assets. Most she lost. The paintings were gone forever, either returned to their rightful owners or absorbed into museum collections as the proceeds of Nazi plunder. Emmy never accepted her fall from grace. She maintained until the end that she had been persecuted unfairly, that she had known nothing of her husband's crimes, that she had simply been a wife who loved her husband. She wrote a memoir defending Hermann's memory. She posed for photographs in her modest apartment, a woman who had once commanded 500 planes to fly in her daughter's honour, now struggling to pay her rent. The question that remains, Emmy Göring died on June 8, 1973, in Munich. She was 80 years old. She had outlived her husband by nearly 3 decades. She never repented. She never admitted wrongdoing. She maintained her innocence until her final breath. Her daughter Edda, Hitler's goddaughter, spent her own life defending her father's legacy. She never married. She never renounced the family name. She died in 2018, buried in an unmarked grave to prevent it from becoming a pilgrimage site. But Emmy's story forces us to confront something we still haven't resolved. When does living in denial become active participation? How much stolen wealth does it take to make someone complicit? At what point does claiming ignorance stop being a defence and start being a confession? Emmy Göring walked through a palace filled with paintings taken from murdered families. She wore jewellery stripped from bodies. She hosted dinners beneath art that had been confiscated as Jewish children were loaded onto trains. And she claimed, until the day she died, that she never knew. Maybe she didn't. Maybe the human capacity for willful blindness is that powerful. Maybe you really can live surrounded by evidence of atrocity and convince yourself you see nothing at all. Or maybe Emmy Göring understood exactly what her life was built on and simply decided that stolen masterpieces looked better when you didn't ask where they came from. She died claiming innocence. History is still deciding whether to believe her.